Thank you all very much for having me here. I was the guest speaker in Rector Shattuck's class a few weeks ago, and I enjoyed it so much, and I especially enjoyed hearing the questions from the students. So I'm going to give a broad overview and perspective, but at the end, I really do welcome all of your questions, and I'm happy to answer just about anything you want to throw at me. So I was asked to speak primarily today on the United States' relationship with Europe and also with Hungary in the context of Hungary's EU presidency. I would start by saying that we view our relationship with Europe, including with Hungary, as critically important. And as President Obama has said, Europe is the cornerstone for our engagement with the rest of the world. However, we have to realize that the nature of the transatlantic relationship is now different than it was 10, 20, 30, or 50 years ago. For most of the latter half of the 20th century, Europe was divided. Institutions such as NATO and the EU's predecessor, the European Coal and Steel Community, were founded to relieve tensions between the nation-states. In Western Europe, we focused on the post-war recovery and then on building institutions to effectively counter the Soviet threat. Hungary and Eastern Europe were behind the Iron Curtain, and the bipolar dynamic shaped our world. Then in 1989, the wall fell. The Soviet Union dissolved 2 years later, and the process began of reuniting Europe. Central and Eastern European nations spent the next decade and a half reforming politically, economically, and militarily, while integrating into European structures. NATO had to change with the times as well. No longer was it one alliance staring down another across a divided line, but now instability was coming from regional conflicts, a lesson we learned all too painfully in the Balkans. Nonetheless, the trajectory of Europe over the last 20 years has been exceptionally positive. As it is in the United States' interest to see a unified and strong Europe, we support initiatives such as the Lisbon Treaty that help give rise to a louder single European voice. We support the efforts of High Representative Catherine Ashton toward creating a more consistent, comprehensive, and effective European foreign policy. The EU has shown that it increasingly wants to and is capable of addressing pan-European challenges. From the integration of the Western Balkans to supporting democracy across the EU's eastern border to promoting energy security and equality of opportunity for all of Europe's citizens, including the Roma, we see strong European leadership. And as you will have noticed, Hungary specifically has identified these areas as priorities for their EU presidency. I'll talk more about how the United States can play a supporting role a little later, but the point I want to make now is that with a strong European partner, the focus of our attention can increasingly turn from how we work with Europe on European matters to how we can work with Europe on global issues and combat common threats. This is critically important since the 21st century world looks far different than the 20th century world. If we step back and try to see the world from the Washington point of view, what do we see? Well, in the Middle East and beyond, we see a yearning of people by people for representative and accountable governance, which is colliding with authoritarian rule. We see Iran and North Korea continuing to work on their nuclear programs and presenting serious proliferation concerns. We see China and India emerging as economic powerhouses. We see instability in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we also see stateless terror, drug and criminal networks operating around the globe. So, taking all this in, we think to ourselves, where do we begin? And the first thing we realize is that we need partners and friends, and Europe is the first place that we look. We may not always agree with Europe on every issue, but I challenge you to find any closer allies or natural partners. We share the same values and have a similar worldview. We believe in openness, transparency, and the rule of law. We believe in the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and assembly and the freedom to choose and practice one's own religion. The strength and legitimacy of the United States and Europe is vastly greater when we work together than when we try to do things alone. So when talking about specific issues, the most appropriate place to start right now is in the Middle East. Secretary Clinton recently said, Americans are in favor of human rights, freedoms, and democracy. We know that ultimately the most progress that can be made on behalf of human beings anywhere is when those individuals are empowered, when they have governments that are responsive. We want to see reform go forward across the region. We want to see it done peacefully, without violence. We want to see it be inclusive, and we want to see movement toward democracy. Obviously, the situation is playing out far differently based upon local circumstances. While there is a common theme of individuals, communities, and entire nations standing up and demanding to be part of the political process, these events are local in nature and reflect the specific situation in each country. This is a challenge for American diplomacy and for European diplomacy. While the events in Egypt and Tunisia were colored with some violence, the full force of the military was not turned on the population, as is happening now in Libya. Our responsibility in Libya does not end with the evacuation of American and EU citizens. There is a significant human element with refugees crossing Libya's borders, a need for humanitarian assistance to people in different parts of Libya, and the need to enforce internationally accepted political decisions such as the arms embargo. NATO defense ministers met yesterday in Brussels and discussed how best the organization can use its assets and capabilities, especially in regard to the humanitarian response and enforcing the arms embargo imposed by the United Nations Security Council. As far as future steps, NATO Secretary General Rasmussen said that decisions will be based on 3 criteria: demonstrable need, a clear mandate, and solid support from the region. The refugee situation is a particular concern. Hungarian State Secretary for European Affairs Enika Győri was in Tunisia last week with the EU Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid, helping to coordinate assistance to help transport the large numbers of refugees home. Significant progress has been made on this front. The United States has committed $47 million to the relief effort, including $13 million to the International Organization for Migration, to help transport thousands of third country nationals home. We also provided military flights to transport 800 Egyptians from Tunisia to Cairo. We are also working with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Committee of the Red Cross to provide basic and emergency services for those most in need. We don't yet know what the end result will be in Libya, but the one thing that is clear is that Gaddafi has lost all legitimacy and needs to leave immediately. As for the other countries in the region, there have been changes, but as of yet, there is no secure path to economic and political reform. All we have to do is look back to 1979 and Iran, which began with popular protests against the Shah, and see how the hope of that time was hijacked. I'm not saying that we are facing a similar outcome here, but it is important to keep in mind that democracy is about more than just an election. It requires institutions such as independent judiciaries, freedom of the press, and protection of minorities. It requires the rule of law, not of oligarchs. As the transitions go forward, we will work with our counterparts in the region and give advice where we can. But ultimately, neither the United States nor Europe will decide what happens within these countries. As outside actors, all we can do is offer our support and advocate for meaningful and transparent processes that produce results. The Middle East is not the only region where we face challenges and have to answer the question of how best to advance our security, our interests, and our values. We have to deal with countries across the political spectrum, some with world outlooks and values far different from our own. Take, for instance, the complex relationships the United States and Europe have with China. On the one hand, we advocate for human rights and political reform, and on the other, our economies are increasingly interdependent. And that takes us to President Obama's top foreign policy priority, and the top priority for many of our allies, and that is Afghanistan. As Secretary Clinton said on February 18, we have made progress, but the tribal areas along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan remain the epicenter of violent extremism. Despite losses, al-Qaeda terrorists retain dangerous capabilities and continue to plot attacks and support and inspire regional affiliates. While distinct groups, al-Qaeda and the Taliban, still maintain an alliance, and the Taliban continues to wage a brutal insurgency against the government in Kabul. After taking office, President Obama launched a thorough review and set a clear goal to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda. With that objective, we are following three mutually reinforcing tracks: a military offensive against al-Qaeda terrorists and Taliban insurgents, a civilian campaign to bolster the governments, economies, and civil societies of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and an intensified diplomatic push. Progress on the first two tracks helps the third, which supports an Afghan-led political process to split the weakened Taliban off from al-Qaeda and reconcile those who will renounce violence and accept the Afghan constitution. All three tracks set the stage for the transition plan that NATO endorsed in Lisbon to shift responsibility for the future of Afghanistan to the Afghans. In the end, they must provide security, strengthen governance, and reach a political solution to end the conflict. The transition will be formally launched this month, with troop reductions beginning in July and continuing based on conditions on the ground, with a target date for completion at the end of 2014. Over the last 2 years, we laid down the red lines for reconciliation with insurgents. They must renounce violence, cut ties with al-Qaeda, and abide by the Afghan constitution. If former militants are willing to meet these conditions, they would be able to participate in the political life of the country. This process will become increasingly viable as Afghan leadership strengthens across the country, but it is dependent on all of Afghanistan's major ethnic and political blocs having a stake in the outcome and a responsibility for achieving it. It will require participation and support of Afghanistan's neighbors, first and foremost, Pakistan. As we have underscored from the beginning, Pakistan is crucial to the success of Afghanistan, as pressure needs to come from both sides of the border. While we have not always seen eye to eye with Pakistan, growing cooperation and action by the Pakistani army has had its results. We have expanded our civilian efforts in Pakistan through the Kerry Lugar Burman Assistance Program to help meet Pakistan's urgent energy and economic needs, and quickly responded with help following the devastating floods last year. On the civilian side in Afghanistan, a major focus has been to expand our presence in the field and get more experts to provide hands-on leadership on development projects. Efforts like Hungary's Provincial Reconstruction and Mentoring Team in Baghlan province are key to this strategy. We are working with Afghan institutions to help them improve auditing and accountability, but corruption, fraud, and waste are still problems and are a high priority for us. While the transition will end in 2014, our commitment to Afghanistan will not. NATO has pledged an enduring military and financial commitment, knowing the stakes, remembering the horrible terrorist attacks of the last decade. We cannot and will not abandon Afghanistan. Coming back to this continent, in Budapest, I would like to say a few words about the Hungarian EU presidency. It was unfortunate that the start of the presidency was somewhat clouded by the debate surrounding the media law, since Hungary has put forth a number of priorities that the United States views as extremely important and that we would like to see advanced during Hungarian leadership. Among them is the continued political and economic integration of the Western Balkans into Europe, including the accession of Croatia into the European Union. Of course, meeting the membership requirements is up to each candidate, and the decision to grant admission lies with the EU. But as a friend of the EU and with such a stake in the region, we believe that the EU membership brings stability as well as contributes to the social and economic development of each country. In addition, we value the emphasis that Hungary has placed on the EU's Eastern Partnership Initiative. I know there is some disappointment that the summit was delayed and will now take place under the Polish presidency, but Hungary will still be a co-host and will help to shape the agenda. Last year, the United States allocated $310 million, just last year alone, in the EPI region, in addition to our assistance to Georgia and a 5-year, $262 million Millennium Challenge corporate compact with Moldova, aimed at reducing poverty and accelerating economic growth through infrastructure and agricultural programs. Our goals of supporting civil society development, promoting health and education, bolstering peace and economic growth are very closely linked to the Eastern Partnership Initiative platform as well. By closely coordinating our assistance, we can and do maximize our impact. Another very important agenda item is energy security and the development of a common EU energy policy. As you may know, the U.S. and the EU formed an Energy Council in 2009. Secretary Clinton noted at the Council meeting last November that we've already achieved a great deal, including working to secure new sources of natural gas for Europe and working with Ukraine to become a more reliable partner for Europe. Beyond the search for new sources of fossil fuels, we also have the opportunity to make the U.S. and the EU leaders in developing new and more efficient technologies. That requires ensuring that our markets are interconnected, transparent, and competitive. And finally, we are pleased to see the emphasis that Hungary has placed on promoting the development of a framework European Roma inclusion policy. As Secretary Clinton said last April, protecting and promoting the human rights of Roma everywhere has long been a personal commitment for me, and under the Obama administration, it is a priority of the United States. It is the job of governments to combat discrimination, prejudice, and marginalization of all persons, including the Roma. Related to this, I would like to say a few words about the importance the United States places on empowering women and girls, especially since International Women's Day was only a few days ago. Supporting the rights of women and girls is a cross-cutting issue with relevance to many of the priorities I have already described. Secretary Clinton said in a recent interview, "I believe that the rights of women and girls are the unfinished business of the 21st century. I believe that we have like-minded partners in the European Union in addressing this priority. If we are to build a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world, we cannot leave half of the population behind. We cannot successfully tackle the challenges that confront us in relation to the environment, security, economics, development, and more if women are not engaged in every level of society. The United States is committed to the empowerment of women not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it is the smart thing to do. When women make progress, countries make progress. So, as you can see, our agenda is wide and diverse. And while China and India may attract headlines, it is Europe that is standing by our side on every issue. President Obama stressed that the United States would act in partnership with the rest of the world, and only in partnership will we be successful. And on that note, I'm going to conclude my prepared remarks and open it up to your questions. Thank you.